So, my guest today, Mark, is a former Upper Midwest Golden Gloves lightweight champion, boxing trainer, poet, and author. And Mark's life spans worlds that don't often get explored together, which is the physical intensity and discipline of boxing, the interior world of writing and poetry, and the deep engagement with faith, ancestry, and spiritual inquiry. So, Mark grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, with a strong American Irish community shaped by Catholic tradition, later influenced by the Lakota spirituality, and began boxing at the age of 10, went on to have over 100 amateur fights, competed nationally and trained in the Olympic Training Centre. Experiences that forged resilience, rhythm and self-knowledge both inside and outside the ring. So we're also going to be talking about your book, About Time, millions of copies sold for Dad, written after the loss of your father in 2019, which is a deeply personal, poetic exploration of love, grief, masculinity, revealing how boxing, jazz, prayer, ancestry and community can all become metaphors for living well. So this conversation isn't just about boxing, it's about, or even one man's story, it's about what it means to grow up into a healthy male identity in a changing world, and exploring how faith can help people endure tough times, how masculinity has shifted over recent decades, and the wisdom that Mark could offer to men and women who are also raising boys today. Welcome. And Mark, many people know what you've done, boxing titles, fights, training others, but fewer know who you are becoming. How would you describe yourself now beyond the labels of boxer and writer?
Well, beyond the labels of boxer and writer, an American man who's a Catholic, and I also I'm a member of a group called the Ancient Order of Hibernians, which is the oldest Irish Catholic fraternal organization in the United States, and so I'm involved with that culturally. But as far as when it comes down to the very root of things, I'm a man who values love, family, and life, and I really value the structure of the anchor of family, and so I love my city where I grew up. I love my country, and I'm a man that just wants to do the best that I can, and when it comes down to it, I'm a combination of my mother and father, and hopefully I'm able to carry on the best as possible, and God willing, if I'm ever able to unify with a woman, carry that on to coming generations.
So you were talking about the man behind the story, but also what I was intrigued by is you started boxing at 10. And so, we know of you as a boxer and as a writer, but what is it that it gave you as a young man growing up? Because I know at first you had to convince your parents to let you start doing boxing, but what did it give you as a man that you think maybe nothing else could?
It gave me confidence. It just gave me a certain kind of confidence that I wouldn't otherwise have. It's given me a kind of security that I think where I always had this feeling that everything will be okay, that I'll survive, that I'll get through things. I think that's really what it gave me more than anything. And also, I believe it gave, by giving me that kind of confidence, it enabled me to develop intellectually also, and to succeed academically. Um, I come from a family that has it's got that's it's pretty pretty scholarly and pretty high achieving. Now my mother, neither of her parents graduated from high school. I mean, they were really poor, and my grandfather on my mother's side, at 17, joined the Army Air Corps and was a waist gunner on a B-17 bomber flying over Germany in World War II. And my grandmother was taken out of school when she was 12, and she just kind of took care of the house and cooked and everything. And um, but my mother, she's the first one in her family to go to college. She graduated from the University of Minnesota, and she was a school teacher at first, and then worked city jobs, and then decided she wanted to go to law school. So she actually
Mm.
became a lawyer when I was 15. Um,
Wow.
and my father, my father was had graduated from he graduated from a Catholic college in northern Minnesota, right in the Army. Was a first lieutenant platoon leader and was wounded in Vietnam. So by the time he was 24, he was out of the Army, and he started out as an accountant, and then he was a independent insurance agent for most of my life, and I always look at the boxing magazines. And so the first year that I was boxing, when I was 10 years old, they got me a subscription for Christmas to, my gift was a subscription to the magazine, the most famous boxing magazine in the world. And I started out looking at the pictures. I would read the captions, then I would read the rankings from heavyweight down to junior flyweight, all the top 10 rankings. And then I would eventually I'm looking at the book at the magazine long enough, I started reading reading whole articles and stuff. So it became something that got me more literate and everything. But
Mm.
I think the daily discipline and then desire to actually win and be a champion and be thought of as something special by other people, and then also the fear of say getting hit in the stomach or something, and being soft enough that I would keel over would make me run more, make me train harder, do more sit-ups and everything. As much as the fear of losing, as much as the desire and determination to win.
It sounded as though you were really focused from that age of wanting to go into boxing and start training in boxing. And was I right that I heard that you also did get a BA in English? You did
I did.
eventually go, yeah?
I did eventually get a BA in English from University of Minnesota. I think that one of my biggest weaknesses is in my life has been measuring myself against other people. Because, say,
Mm.
my very first fight, I won. And I was really so happy that I won my first fight. In the second fight, I could have beat the guy. I could see how I could have beaten him and everything. I just was a little nervous, and I lost decision to this kid. And I remember walking away and just feeling so down, and I was even starting to cry a little bit when I got away from the ring. And the reason was because I was measuring myself against Sugar Ray Leonard. I believed his record as an amateur before he became professional was something like 105 wins and 5 losses or something like that. I thought to myself, man, and in 109 more fights, I can only lose 4 more times. As in,
Mm.
whereas actually, when I look back on boxing now, um, I really believe that one in an amateur boxing career, uh, the record is not it doesn't matter as much as it does in a professional boxing career. And losses in a professional boxing career don't matter as much as people think they do, in
Mm.
terms of developing a fighter. And two, uh, you don't have to have this prestige and a national title or international uh, success to be a boxer and to try to climb the ranks and be a contender to try to win a world title. And the reason I say that is because I've got two examples, and one is my teammate Mike Evgen, and my other teammate that's Evgen, and my other teammate Will Grigsby. Mike Evgen won the it's more of a it's considered more of a minor title because it's not a big sanctioning body, but it's a well-recognized sanctioning body. He won the International Boxing Organization Junior Welterweight Championship of the world back in 1992. He turned professional in 1987, 88, and I think 88, and he uh, uh, he was known around town here. He wasn't known around, around the country, around the world that well. And he built himself up, and he wasn't making a lot of money as he did. And he always kept his job while he was doing it. He worked really hard. And
Mm.
Will Grigsby, he only had so Evgen had over 100 fights. Will Grigsby had 35 fights. and he became the IBF junior flyweight champion of the world. He held that title a couple of times, and uh, it's like he went to the National Golden Gloves twice. He lost his first fight, I believe, both times. And then he just turned professional right away. And when you're at a young age, 18, 19 years old, you've got only so much time because it's something you have to do when you're young. So
Mm,
you got to just do it right away. And you got to look at it as in kind of a working class kind of uh, a trade type of a situation where you're developing a trade the way an electrician develops his trade, the way I don't know, I mean just like the way or artistically speaking, the way a sculptor develops his trade. I mean, but going on, you're 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 building yourself up on the level that you can at which you can compete at the time that you're having each fight, and every few fights you're raising the
mm,
level of competition. In professional boxing, it's an easier thing to do, although it's difficult because usually you don't have a lot of money financing it. So everyone's got to have a job. The trainer's got to have a job.
mm,
The promoter's always doing, you know, the promoter's always doing something. Um, but you have to have if you got a manager, that's usually someone that he's got a little bit of money, but he's not necessarily in most cases got the time to be fully involved in the boxing world, unless you get lucky and get the right guy. But what you're trying to do is make as much money as possible uh, and finish with as much money as possible with the least amount of physical damage that you're going to get that you can get,
mm,
without getting hurt. And in amateur boxing, whoever is there to fight is who you have to fight, and you got the tournament set, and whoever is better. But in professional boxing, you're it's like, if you're becoming a bricklayer, or if you're learning how to be a carpenter and or to build houses or something, you're kind of apprenticing yourself to someone who is, that would be your trainer, who's taking you along and showing you how to do this stuff. And then he's finding guys. The idea, when you train a fighter to try to bring him to a successful professional career, is you start them out against guys that can't beat them, but
mm.
they're athletic enough and they're strong enough that if they hit them right, they might beat them. They might, they can hurt them. So it's enough of a challenge, but it's a safe enough challenge that you can try out the things that you're learning, and get yourself up to a higher level. Yeah, but
So who else inspired you then? Who were the other people that you looked up to that you either wanted to emulate, or there was their style or their way of being?
so you probably haven't heard of this guy, but my favorite boxer of all time is a guy named Alexis Arguello. God rest his soul, he died in 2010, but he was from Nicaragua, and he came first to Canada, then down to Miami, and um, he was the featherweight, junior lightweight, and lightweight champion of the world, and he tried to be the first guy to win a fourth world title. He lost two very close fights to a guy named Aaron. They called him Aaron the Hawk Pryor. Um, Arguello's nickname was um, uh, Flaco Explosivo, which means the explosive thin man
Mm,
in Spanish. But because he was five he was 5'10" to five between 5'10" and 5'11". He's fighting as a lightweight, 135 pounder, and he just had this really beautiful style and a really precise kind of way of punching that I always appreciated. Originally, like I said, I compared myself to Sugar Ray Leonard. Um, so when I started, he was the big star in uh, uh, in the United States as far as professional boxing was concerned. 9 years old, going into fifth grade, and the movie. So the previous year, the movie Rocky had come out, And I remember my brother when he was seeing it advertised on TV, says, "We got to see the movie." You guys, I think, nah, it looks stupid. And we actually didn't see it, and I don't know why we didn't get around to seeing it because my family went to a lot of movies, but my parents took us to see the movie Rocky 2, and I just thought that was such an incredible story, and I thought it was just so cool. And then whenever boxing was on, I just was kind of drawn to it, interested in it. But it wasn't that much on my radar yet. But at the time, there was, as I said, Sugar Ray Leonard was getting big, and there was a lot of talk on the sports shows about how the 1976 Olympic team was so great, and then so amateur boxing is getting broadcast, the USA team a lot on TV. So I was taking a lot of interest to it, because I always wanted to be something, something special like that. Because first I thought I wanted to be an actor. Then I thought maybe I wanted to be a rock and roll star. I didn't have the discipline to really stick with the instruments, though. When I had the chance to box, when I saw that movie, Rocky 2, I just thought it was just so inspiring. I thought, yeah, man, I'd like to be a boxer. And I told my mom I wanted to do it, and she said, no way, no way. And I said to my dad, come on, there's got to be some place, got to be a gym somewhere. And he finally took me. He said, I didn't think I know a place. He took me to this gym. And when I started it, I just loved it so much. And the way kids would, you come home from school and you get your homework done and you can go out and play, or maybe even before you want to go out and play right away. And kids would ride their bikes, they'd throw a football around or play catch with a baseball or what. My way of playing was I get to the gym and I go through my whole routine. So it's kind of a cross between um, I'm really seriously a competitive boxer and I'm trying to be good and I'm gonna have to beat this guy, show this guy when I'm sparring that I'm better than he is and stuff like that. But at the same time, I'm when um, I'm in the gym and I'm hitting the heavy bag and I'm dancing around the heavy bag and doing the different moves and practicing everything. I'm imagining myself being that professional boxer that I watched on TV. I'm imagining
Mm,
myself that I am Muhammad Ali or Larry Holmes or Alexis Arguello or Sugar Ray Leonard, And so it's this exercise. It's this really beneficial, rigorous exercise. But as I'm doing it, I'm pretending that I'm that person.
mm,
So that's my way at 10 years old. That's my way of playing. And when you see someone give up on something, it's just not going to work on just, it's like I, you can feel, I mean, you can feel that this guy's just feeling like, I'm no good, man. I'm just like, it's like,
mm.
why do I even try? You know what I mean? And I think we've all had that kind of feeling before. There's certain things that happened to me, from that time going through high school that actually diminished my confidence, that made me think, maybe it won't really work out and stuff.
So you said you've worked with, lots of young men, and what be when my sort of second career after training as a therapist and coach, I ended up working in a lot of schools in secondary school. So in the UK, I don't know if there was a very sort of stark difference with how boys were supported or how issues were managed and how you could connect with young men and support them in education, their mindset and the difficulties they faced, and help them think, even if they don't get into boxing, how they think about how they develop that competency, the control, the confidence, and then managing things that they're scared of, things that they think they want to do but can easily give up, because you can face that at many points in your life, can't you? But as a young person, having a grounding and having people around you that can help you get through some of those fears and anxieties that often, they don't want to show, but they feel
Right.
them underneath, and it can mean that they end up avoiding doing the things that
Yeah.
they want to do, that they're passionate about doing.
The best thing is, if when having children, if mom and dad can be married and love each other and be living in the
Mm,
same house or dwelling place and loving each other and focusing on the children and particularly focusing on the boys, because as a boy becoming a man, one sees the example of
mm,
that cooperation, because the two become one in marriage, and becoming one, you become one in your children. I mean, the children are
mm,
the love that you make. So they're
mm,
actually Pope John Paul explains this when he was still Cardinal Carl Wojtyla in his book Love and Responsibility, which he wrote in 1959, I think. Um,
Wow.
he says he says that the first relationship all human beings have is with mother and father, right?
Mm,
Now, even if you are a test tube baby, when you think about it, you're a combination of the genetics of your mother and your father. So maybe that's obviously a very fractured relationship, but the first relationship you have this connection between the individual who is your mother and who is your father. So anyway, I think that's a really important thing because you need stability. The
mm,
stability is what gives you the ability to develop. And I worked with kids that were the most vulnerable kids that we have in our society, and I worked with a vulnerable population. I was working with the Native American Indian community. So the Native community, um, they had this shelter. They still have it. It's called Andai Young, which is Ojibwe for our home. It's Andai Young Center in the middle of St. Paul, and they have a capacity for in this house for 5 boys and 5 girls. So it's a changing population because it's a temporary emergency homeless shelter. So kids are placed for one reason or another outside of their family and taken in there, and the ages range from 5 to 17. And there are some people now that are in the 30s, getting into their 40s that I've occasionally run into someone that I worked with and come up and say hi to me. And it's like it's so good to see them and know that I had some role in helping them become responsible adults. In the Native American, there's this value of a kind of a collective value, kind of a collective extended family value. Like like someone who's an elder in the community, you'd call uncle or you call aunt, but the one confusion that I would have with that is, I look at my nuclear family and my brothers, my father's brother is my uncle.
mm,
My mother's sister is my aunt. And concentrating on who that biological relative is a really important thing. And actually, that was one of the values in that shelters when we place a kid. The first place, it was kind of like an extended thing, right? You try to place a kid first back with family if the family's
mm.
stable enough. If it's not stable enough, with a relative from that family. If not a relative from that family, then you try to get someone within that tribe. If not within that tribe, within the native community, before you go out to outside the community. That's an important thing because family is really important, and you want to keep family together as strongly
Mm.
as possible.
Because if you've got some vulnerability, you haven't got confidence, you haven't got strength, and you haven't got a system around you to support you, then you're vulnerable and exposed to whether we call them the darker forces or the aspects of society that lead you down a very dark path. And there's lots of dark paths existing at the moment, whether that's drugs, alcohol. We look at the cities, we look at homelessness,
Yeah,
the fragmented lives that people have got. Yeah, so stability, confidence, certainty, and having support around you certainly does make a difference. How do we support people to have healthy, functioning relational dynamics that bring these conversations out about not just presupposing what it means to for you to be a man and what it means for me to be a woman? And it's a conversation
yeah,
I'm having individually with people. Trying to do that in
yeah,
a group and be part of any one group is always going to bring a contrasting group. We can argue for this, and it then make us sound like that we're not for this. And that's why I was interested in also talking with you about how we balance our faith, our spirituality, our ancestry, who we are,
yeah,
how do we define who we are? Because all of these things give us a sense of self. Because you
yeah,
were talking about your father and you're the sixth generation of Irish coming to the coming to America and how you retain your faith and your heritage. And that sounds as though that was very much transmitted to you when you were growing up with the people that were around you and from your dad.
Yeah, it was. And particularly now the thing is, um, my grandmother on my father's side is of German descent. I was, I was bringing communion to her from. I'd go to mass and bring communion to her every uh, every Sunday, and so she maintained her faith. My father was very strong with it. His family was very strong with the faith, and the value of praying the rosary. I got from my paternal grandparents, um, in particular because my grandmother died earlier. My grandfather, they always prayed it, and I decided to start praying it myself at a certain point in my adulthood. But we have an ideal, and that ideal is not something to get rid of just because we don't all reach that ideal. Because even those of us um, in families that have marriages that are intact and husband and wife stay together till death do they part, none of those are perfect because we're of a fallen nature. And I would say if I look at my own family, it may seem very idealized in this book because I talk about all the good stuff, you know, but there's a little allusion to a little bit of fighting that my dad and I did. I mean, there's yeah, constantly tired, always worried that I wasn't writing enough or wasn't at the gym enough, frustrated that I wasn't pulling in enough money on my freelance endeavors to quit my straight job. I was at that shelter every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 11 p.m., working till 8 a.m. the next morning. One night, at least a year into that overnight position, there was a little black boy, 5 years old and placed in shelter just that day, who slept on the couch because he was too scared to be on the boys' floor in the darkness of the old house. And while I was in the kitchen doing the dishes after midnight, I heard him crying hysterically through the sound of the water spraying on pots and pans. I remember there was nothing I could do, so I just kneeled on the floor next to the couch and gave him a hug and rocked back and forth, saying, "You're a good boy. You're a good boy." At the time, on Monday mornings, Dad would pick me up at my apartment after work and take me to breakfast. I'd been doing so many things, reaching the middle of my 30s and trying to establish myself to the level I thought I should have reached in my 20s, so I was very busy. Dad told me he wasn't spending enough time with me in my adult years and wanted me to commit to seeing him once a week. That was a time when Dad altered his approach to many issues in life, even eventually, at Mom's insistence, going to counseling at the VA and getting evaluated for post traumatic stress disorder. Even though he'd been married his entire adult life, had no chemical dependencies, and was never unemployed, which were considered the biggest indicators, at least on the surface level, he said, they diagnosed him with it. That's understandable because he saw a lot of fighting and death in Vietnam and almost died there before his 24th birthday. But I told him he was crazy. There was no way I could commit to seeing him once a week. I just didn't have the time. Why not? Because, Dad, I'm trying to do so many things. I just don't have the time. Fine, he said. I guess you can come spend time with me at my funeral. That hit me hard. I committed to his request, and we had breakfast together once a week for the last 15 years of his life. That's the best decision I ever made. Anyway, he picked me up Monday morning after the weekend I'd worked when I had to comfort that 5-year-old boy alone at the shelter. He said hi, and we sat for a moment as I told him about it, and I just couldn't help it. I started to cry a little. It was good to be with my dad. I always knew who he was and that he was always in my life, and I was always his son. I never had any confusion about who I was or to whose family I belonged. Later that year, when I met with Lynn in her office for my employee evaluation, she gave me a great compliment. Well, I'm not going to go on with the rest of that. I should have ended that with I never had any confusion about who I was or to whose family I belonged. Next sentence of that.
It sounded like you were saying there was lots of things to catch up on because you're in your 30s now and you were trying to keep really busy. And
Yeah,
your dad's request initially was like one other thing, but what you said from that is you never regret that for the next 15 years you had
yeah,
breakfast with him every week.
And there were times when we had breakfast and we fought. He's,
Okay.
basically, what are you doing with your life? Come on, get it together, kid. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. But it's like, or we had disagreements and we got mad at each other. I mean, it's like that's what life is. But it's like, there's this priest, there's this local radio, well, it's a national radio station, but you can get it here locally. Called Relevant Radio. It's a Catholic radio station. There's this priest named Father Richard Simon. And so he's got a show called Father Simon Says. And he says, he's talking about marriage. He says, love is when you do something and you can't stand the fact that you have to do it. Love isn't just all, oh, I'm in love with you, but it's like, it is that, but it's also when, you show up because you have to. you
Mm,
know, and it's like, you may be really angry that you have to show up and like you're frustrated, like, why did I gotta do this for you again? But you do it anyway because
yeah.
that's what it is. And it's something that growing up in a family, just as a child, becoming an adult, I witnessed that myself also, and maybe I wouldn't have understood it exactly as clearly as it would just
Mm.
explain if I hadn't heard this guy on the radio talking about it that way. But it's something that really rings true. And anyway,
But like
so
you were saying earlier, though, isn't it? Is you witness that of what your parents were like. So you have a model in your mind of
yeah,
what it can be like when you are married. And it's something that is important for, when you have offspring of the kind of environment you want to create for them. You're doing it consciously. I don't know if our parents and their parents ever really did it consciously. You just got by every day, but you're conscious of the model that you want to create.
natural aversion to anyone or anyone's effort, anyone making the effort to try to to deconstruct that structure. And
Hmm.
that's really what that's something that's the battle we've been going through in Western civilization
Hmm.
for your and myself, because you're a child of the 60s. So reason it comes down to is any policy or any um, attempt to inculcate values socially that discourages people from marrying and having children and having another generation weakens us all, and it just does.
I
And
agree, but I think it's also really tricky, Mark, because, you know, I've worked a lot with, I've also worked a lot with women on at the raw end of life, where where they've been in relationships, married or not married, where it's been toxic and abusive. And we also know from the stats I think one of the top divorce lawyers in America says that most people end up in divorce, 50%, 70% will end up in divorce. So I think there's several aspects about, two people coming together in terms of who they are as a well-rounded person before they even enter into a relationship. And then having some concept about what it is that they think that relationship is
right,
going to bring together for those two people. And what I noticed last year when I've got a camper van and I went out in my camper van and did a lot of long trips to different parts of the UK, is I was seeing a lot of solid families that were out and about with their children, their grandchildren, their partners. I was seeing a lot of people who were happy, hanging out, having a coffee in different places that I visited. And there was a real contrast with what I was being presented with on social media that was dramatizing and glamorizing a lot of these maybe 5% issues and making it look like that was the way life is and all these arguments going on. And then I'm out on the road meeting people all the time where life
yeah,
doesn't look that much different from what it looked like 10, 20 years ago. And so sometimes it looks like we've really evolved as humans, and other times it looks like no evolvement has happened at all. So I think there is a lot there about thinking about what is important to when two people come together and when they have children, and what matters in that, as in some idea about who are you, what's the culture, what is it you're trying to demonstrate every day, and how can you get on board so that you don't end up being that 70% of people that are more likely to end up in the divorce courts. And it suits society, it suits lawyers, doesn't it? They make a lot of
Yeah.
money with people arguing and not getting on and falling out and their family falling apart.
Uh, People who are married within the larger church of some religion, particularly Christianity in the United States, that the divorce rate is much lower, and that particularly among Catholics is much lower. Then that it's actually lower than 50%, or
Mm,
but but the other thing is a lot of people just don't get married anymore. And
mm,
I mean, it's not a moral judgment that I'm making.
mm,
It's just a uh, an an objective statement that bond of marriage actually it solidifies a family. People have this understanding. I mean, no, we make a deal at the beginning, no matter how bad it gets, neither one of us
mm.
gets to leave. We've committed to, maybe we've committed to be miserable together the rest of our lives.
Oh, in in many cases in the past, yeah, maybe it was that. But as an ideal, but I think what I'm seeing with the clients that I work with, young women and men,
Yeah.
is really about that sort of prep work. I think romance, relationships has been romanticized. Hollywood hasn't helped at all. And
Well,
people build up this idea about what life's going to look like. And I think having some real conversations before you even go down that road, if this is a person that you do want to commit with, maybe there's more chance of having a stable relationship and maintaining it and it working out. But going back, let's go back to your book, because one thing I wanted to ask you about as well is it feels more like it's a biography
yeah.
and also spiritual integration of a life that you've lived. But what was it about poetry in particular that you feel like was the right language for telling your story as well?
I steal from every chance I get. Um, Anyway, he told me at the time, he says, you got to put a chapbook together. You got to get a book of poetry together. And I've been working on a novel that I still haven't published for a long time. And I was, I wanted to get that done. And I was just taking on too, trying to manage life and say, I want to get that. He said, no, you got to get. So I started gathering these poems together and to put them into a book. And I thought, okay, it'll be a first published book. It'll be just poetry. That's fine. And the whole poetry thing got put aside. And then my dad died. And as my dad
Mm,
died, I'm looking at him saying, I need more time. I He hasn't seen me the major things in life, particularly getting married and having children, and also, a bunch of other accomplishments I'd like him to see me have in my life, particularly getting a book published. I've never done it. I'm looking at him in the hospital bed as he dies. I'm saying to myself, you know, I don't have any excuse. I mean, the articles I've published over the years and so forth, and in the circles I've been in, I'm perfectly talented enough as a writer to publish a book and get it published, or to write it, to finish a book and get it published completely, put it out to the world and just see what happens, whether it falls flat in its face or not, or whether it sells millions of copies as the title predicts it will. Um, right now, my dad's gone, and there's just it's so the themes of love, family, and life are in the book, and then also it's called "It's About Time,"
mm,
because it's about time I finally did it, and it's time to stop procrastinating in life, and it's time to just get on with things because life is so short. Um,
mm,
the one poem in here, "My Now Departed Brother," written about my friend David Reese, who he was 49 and he died in a motorcycle crash in 2018. So it was in September, so it was roughly a year before my dad died. And uh, he's such a good friend of mine. Um, and I remember telling him one time because he had a problem. He's an artist, and he didn't get around to doing a lot of things and stuff. And I told him one time. I said, Dave, because I'm talking about, I can't hang on. I got to do all this stuff. Like, I said, Dave, and what am I going to accomplish? I said, Dave, and I snapped my fingers and said, look, the beginning of that snap and the end of that snap, life is shorter than that. The idea of writing it in the style of a novel, but
Mm,
even though it's not fiction, and then I tried to balance. My favorite writer is F. Scott Fitzgerald, and my favorite novel is The Great Gatsby. And the one thing I love about The Great Gatsby, which I've read at least 13 times, is it's so balanced. Have you read The Great Gatsby?
mm.
It's you got to read it. It's only 182 pages, something like that. It's really great. Um, but and actually, the narrator Nick Carraway, he talks about coming from the small Middle Western town. Um, he's talking about St. Paul, which is where F. Scott Fitzgerald is from, and um, but the story takes place in New York, and um, everything that's introduced in the first chapter, in the first few pages, at the end, you can see it balance out. It comes back. So I actually a lot the stuff that you read in the first part of it about what's happening when I got the call that my dad had the heart attack and I got to you know, get down to San Francisco. My parents are going to come back from 4 days in San Francisco, and 5 minutes from the airport, he had a heart attack, and 10 days later, I'm praying over him with my mom. As they're turning the life support off, and certain stuff I mentioned there, it's mentioned back towards the end of the book, and so it kind of balances things out, and you understand why stuff happened. So
Mm.
I structured it that way on purpose. But the thing is, I knew what the story was, and I just sat down and I did it for 5 or 6 weeks. I just did it, I just wrote it every day, and I got the first draft out.
And what was great for me is one is we're at different parts of the over the Atlantic,
Yeah,
and your life, what you've lived, and how you view it through your lens it was great for me because it opened up a whole world that I don't know much about,
yeah,
and it took me to some history around your family and all the generations, your relationship with your dad, and I think about the relationships that I have with my sons while I was reading yours, and it was really interesting in that way, and I think that's what I liked about it, is I was observing life for a moment, a taste of life, because I know there's probably way more things that you could write about through the way that you experience and view that, and that was a nice journey for me to go on when our lives are completely different. And I think that's the thing about writing and reading, is you can go on a journey, can't you, either with the character or with the
yeah.
writer as they share their own autobiography of their experience.
You know, two people who gave me different types of encouragement about being a writer and trying to become known as a writer are my paternal grandfather and my mother, my mom,
Mm.
my maternal mother. So, uh, my mom would say to me, you always want to write a novel, you always want to write fiction, and you're always trying to figure out through your experiences how to write fiction based on what you've seen or done and people you know. And you talk about things you've done and places you've gone, things you've seen, and I think you should just write a book about all of your experiences and
Mm.
just tell what factually happened. And I think that people would like that. So to a certain degree, I did that with this book. My grandfather had said to me one time, I'm talking about, yeah, I want to write this novel and whatever, and he says, why don't you be a Catholic writer? Yeah, well, I don't know. I just kind of like because I wanted to write popular stuff. I mean, popular literary work and fiction and I don't know exactly what I said to him, but I think about that now and I think, you know, I don't mind people thinking of me as a Catholic writer. I don't necessarily want to be I wouldn't call myself a Catholic scholar or a scholarly Catholic writer. Uh, the background of growing up as a Catholic and having a Catholic sensibility and Catholic values will be present in my writing in
Mm.
whatever way in whatever form that I'm writing anyway. So those are two things. Um,
So before we sort of end the conversation that we're having today, what
yeah.
would be, what would be the messages for either aspiring writers or aspiring young men who are thinking about their direction like you were as a 10-year-old and you started getting attracted to the idea of becoming a boxer? What would you like to leave people with thinking from all the years of experiences, that you've had?
But love is kind of showing up when you don't want to and stuff like that. Um, and you talked about how we kind of romanticize relationships a little too much, and talking about you know women being able to be in safe relationships and so forth. At the two poems at the end of chapter one, um, what I'm basically saying in one of the poems is and I think and then the one that's a poem called Halfway Around. The second poem is called Life So Simple. Um, and then uh, well, actually, let me read the passage after that, which closes the chapter one, and then I'll elaborating on what this paragraph says. I'll answer the question of what is my message to aspiring. Right? Did you say specifically anyone aspiring writer, or specifically young men who want to write,
Well,
or
there's
both?
both, isn't there? Because you're,
Yeah,
aspiring young men who are thinking at 10, 11 years old who they aspire to and whether or not, they want to push for a particular direction in their life, or to writers, because lots of writers who sit back have ideas, and like you said, the time is now. Why
yeah.
wait? Time's short.
So, so at the end of uh, the second of those two poems, halfway around, um, I just close off the paragraph with, there were some other poems I put together qualifying for appropriate inclusion in this book. I've always held myself, of course, to the highest of standards, never believing any of these poems ready for an attempt at publication, so I never tried, which is why I have so embarrassingly titled the story, It's About Time. Dad challenged me once, as far back, I believe, as 2012, asking me why by the age of 40 I hadn't published at least one book. If I really was a writer, as I asserted myself to be, I should have been able to publish at least 5 novels or other books by then. I told him to lay off, that there were legitimate reasons for current incompletion and that literary success was on its way. But that was all an excuse. The real reason was a lie in my heart that my work was going to be great. I just needed time to concentrate, which is always delayed right now for the job or the friend in trouble or another excuse which justified not trying. The truth is, I was scared, so I never dared. If this book, which can fall flat in its face, is never presented to the public, I'll never know if you, the reader, recognize my talent. If it does, in fact, fall flat in its face, at least metaphorically, I fall flat on mine. However, so what? It's about time.
It's about time.
And actually, for those that want to be writers, that's probably those uh, three words are probably the best advice. It's about time, and
Mm,
it's about time is an amphibly.
mm,
We've got more than one meaning because it's about time, as in it's about time you do it right now, and secondly, it's about time, as in how much time do you have?
mhm.
So, um, and I'm going to recommend a book um, about writing called Writing Down the Bones, which is by Natalie Goldberg. I mentioned it in here. And I say that a lot of these poems are kind of written in this through the style of writing that she suggests, which are just writing exercises of where you just kind of time yourself and you just keep going, and then
Mm,
after you finished it, you kind of look at it and go through it and figure out where it fits into a poem or to another type of writing that you're doing. Um, and I say, read as much as you can and just keep writing. Because another thing she says in that book, which I think is it's just such a universal reality, is write terrible stuff. You know, um, um, I always want to do these interviews and not swear, but I'm going to go ahead and, if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and swear. Um, what she says, write shit, because everybody writes that, right? Because most stuff that the great writers write goes in the garbage or gets deleted or whatever, just gets thrown away. Because in order to write that great novel or that great poem or that great essay or that great, uh, that great short story, your writer has gone through hundreds and hundreds of pages or I mean because you
mm,
write every single day and most of the stuff you're writing is just the rough draft because you
mm,
write every single day and most of the stuff you're writing is just the rough draft. That final
mm.
draft is something that no one sees all the other stuff that you've written.
Yeah.
And then also, if you get something that should spur you to keep writing, because one of two things are going to happen. Everyone will read what you've written, and you get a whole bunch of money for it, and people may praise you for it, but some people might not like it and may criticize you for it,
Mm.
and you may be worried about the criticism you're going to get. About time millions of copies sold for Dad, right? You can get this. Now, let me tell you a reason you should buy it. Um, Go and you can buy it at boxersandbrothermagazine.com/books, which brings you to Amazon or Lulu. And you can purchase it. But this two other reasons besides I think you'll love it, you'll enjoy it, you'll read the whole thing, and you'll feel great about it after you've read it is one, it's got this great cover
Mm.
on it, and I say in this case, judge a book by its cover. Eric Keast, Canadian Ojibwe, who I worked with, he got me that job in Young when I first worked there in the 90s. Did this really brilliant painting for the cover. And so, if nothing else, you can have it on your coffee table or something, and you can have people see it, and then you can have great conversations about it, or you can enjoy just spending hours looking at the intricacy of this beautiful painting, because it's really trippy. And the other thing is, I say buy the book and read it, and make sure you're reading it when you're going to bed at night, because if nothing else, I promise it will put you to sleep.
Well, thank you so much for sharing more about you, your life experiences, and the book. And I look forward to seeing what you produce next because there are more books clearly in there. And like you said, in the background of what's formed, however many pages in a book, there's lots of process that goes on behind the scenes that writers struggle with on a day to day. But it was so good to meet you today, Mark, and thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
I look forward to hearing more about your journey as you move forward in your life and balance this, professional, this persona, the boxer, the trainer, the all the work you put in there with the young people, the ceremonies, the spirituality, the crossovers of identity, family heritage, legacy, all of that. It combines all of that wonderfully. And I think, yeah, definitely going in deeper would be great to see what comes out next. So,
That's
yeah, any
cool.
final message before we end today?
No, just hey, we've only got 49 weeks left in the whole year, so we it's about time we make every one of these weeks count, right?
It is about time. You're right. We do need to make weeks count. We need to show up. We need to
Yeah.
show up for the things that are important. So, yeah. All right, then. I
Yeah.
will say goodbye and I'll
Thank you,
press.
Melanie. I appreciate it. It was really great. It was really, I loved it.